Hey there, just wanted to talk to you today about talking to parents. It's a guide for new and pre service teachers. You, throughout your career, are going to have to talk to the parents of your students, and that is much more difficult than talking to students themselves. It's a whole different ball game, and some teachers avoid it entirely and are not successful, and some teachers embrace it and are very successful. It is hard to be very successful as a teacher if you do not embrace building relationships and talking to the parents of your students. This is really meant for K 12. Obviously, in the earlier grades, there needs to be a ton of communication. And as they grow older, you need to be judicious about that. So, we will talk about that a little bit. All right, first of all, communicate early and often. If the first time a parent hears from you is when their kid is in trouble or has done something in your class, that's probably not going to go very well because they don't know you. And we'll talk about what that means here in a little bit. You should try to build a relationship with each student's parent. You should try to get to know them, get to know some history about their student, take advantage of open house nights. And I know that people don't show up like you would hope they would. For those people who don't show up, try to reach out to them and talk to them and see um, what they can tell you about their kid, what they think is special about their kid. It makes a big difference. And in this day and age, you need some form of communication platform. Some schools will provide that, whether that's email, Class Dojo, Remind. You need to be able to send messages on a regular basis. And keep in mind, most of your parents are just like you. They like text messages and not phone calls. So try to remember that. Just because you're in a school environment doesn't mean people want to communicate differently than they would otherwise. So try to communicate often. Newsletters are helpful. A little message about what's going on in class each week is helpful. Important things coming up, big tests and things are helpful. All of that helps you build relationships with parents. So let's understand parents. If you're not a parent yourself, all of us have had parents in some form or fashion, but try to understand the psychology of it. What do they want? Well, most parents, and you've always got extremes in any situation, but most parents, they just want fairness for their kid. They want reason to be applied to situations. If a kid flips a rubber band across class and their kid gets suspended for that, they're going to consider that unreasonable. They're going to consider that very harsh, and so that's part of it. The parents also want school to be how they remember it. So keep in mind, you're dealing with, education's a weird profession where people go to hospitals every day and they don't tell the hospital to run a hospital because they've how to run a hospital because they've been in a hospital before. However, with education, people think because they were in school for 12 years they know how to run a school. And so that's just it's unique to our profession in a sense that people feel like they can tell us how we should be doing things. Keep that in mind, that parents feel like they know more about the functions of a school and that sort of thing they, other professions. They don't acknowledge that they're lay people with it as easily or as early. So keep in mind that you have to deal with that and be patient with that. And most parents want their kid to succeed. And sometimes they want that more than their kids deserve. And so that's where you have to be judicious about how you address that. So, one thing that teachers talk about a lot, that there's this myth, and it may be true, but there's no way to prove whether it's true or not. But there's certainly a perception that, well, back in the day, parents would support the teachers, and today they believe everything their kid says. But let's look at this. Why would parents believe everything their kid says over you? Well, they know their kid for that kid's entire life, but they don't know you. And if they're just now hearing from you 3 months into school and have only heard things that their kid has said about you, then isn't it reasonable that they would believe their kid over you, especially if they've laid the groundwork by basically giving you bad press at home? It's going to be hard for that kid to give you bad press at home if all the parent hears from you are positive things, lots of information, lots of feedback. You're putting in grades, you're giving feedback, you're sending nice messages, you're doing that sort of thing on a regular basis. It's not going to be congruous with what the kid's saying if the kid comes home and trash talks you, but you're doing like really nice things all the time. And honestly, if you're doing those types of things, you're not likely to get trash talked in the first place. Parents have had bad experiences at that specific school before, usually. Parents have had bad experiences when they were in school. Kids lie to keep out of trouble. I know that's shocking, but they do, because they don't want to get in trouble at home, so they're going to make up a big lie about what happened. And also, sometimes parents just think, if I just support my kid or back my kid in this thing, it'll go away more quickly, and that's the path of least resistance at home. So you've got to keep in mind all of these things are mitigating factors during your conversation, especially if it's a conflict with a parent. And this video is geared towards, conflict rather than just a nice conversation. So let's say you are having a conflict or a difficult conversation with a parent. How do you respond? So always you use facts, not emotions, and definitely not labels. So uh, you want it to stick with the facts. The student did this at this time. I saw this. Many students saw this, that sort of thing. You don't want to talk about how it made you feel. You don't want to talk about how it made somebody else feel. Just stick with the basic facts of what happened. Be kind, even if they're really angry at you, even if they call you names, even if they say this or that. Just be kind the entire time. There's no reason not to be. You can't match their energy. You are not going to win in this situation. The way you win in this situation is that you resolve the conflict by the end of the phone call. It's not winning an argument or proving something over something else. You need to just let the conversation happen, let it flow. You win if the conflict is resolved and the parent either accepts that you're going to disagree and that's fine, you're going to move on, or if the parent finally comes to realize that the reason you're calling them is something they need to take seriously about their kid. If a parent is venting at you, if they're angry, let them vent until they're done within reason. I mean, you can't let it go for 2 or 3 hours. I mean, if you're calling during your planning period, if it takes up your entire planning, I'm sorry, but you need to let them vent. And it's always good at the beginning of a conversation to say, look, I've got, 5 or 10 minutes for this phone call. I've got 15 minutes for this phone call because I've got other things to do. If you if you put a time limit on it, then that's going to limit that. But as long as somebody's angry, you have to let them vent until they're finished, or they're going to spend the rest of the time that you're interrupting them and all of that trying to finish what they're venting about. It's always best not to become defensive. In other words, if somebody says, "Well, my kid said you did this," and you could respond with, "Well, I absolutely did not do that," and go off. Or you could say, "Well, I understand why you believe your son. You've lived with them their entire life. They came home, but I assure you that's not something I would ever do. And here's some evidence from uh, previous communications. Or don't even address it. Say, well, that's absolutely not true, and go on. But you don't want to become defensive and make all of these excuses and things, because it'll sound like you're lying. And you always want to redirect the conversation to the issue at hand. If they're mad at you because of something you did, of course that needs to be addressed. But if it's about something the student did, redirect the conversation to what the student did. Again, the facts, not the emotions, and also never use labels. Never say, well, your kid is a insert a label. You never want to do that. That is basically a death sentence because it's mean, first of all, and second of all, there's nowhere else to go in that conversation. If that parent believes that you as a teacher believes that their kid is something that is negative, that is going to a sort of fixed mindset where you feel like the student can never be anything but that thing. So try not to use that, or don't use those at all. So after you have a call, if it's confrontational, you need to document it, which means you write. I always have a notebook in my desk for documentation. Just handwrite date and time, what happened, what was said, who called whom, that sort of thing. You need to give your principal a heads up and say, look, I had this confrontational conversation with this parent. They may or may not be calling you, but I absolutely, did not uh, escalate the situation. But we didn't end on good terms on the phone. And if that parent has an email, you need to send a follow up email with some bullet points outlining the conversation. And that can be something like Mr. and Miss So and so. I enjoyed, or you don't even have to be that fake. You could just say, we spoke on the phone this afternoon at such and such time. I wanted to outline some parts of the conversation, and please let me know if you have any questions. And if you send that, that's also good documentation, and it's also going to be signal to them that they're not going to be able to come and call the principal and lie about what you said on the phone. You've already documented what it said. So, and honestly, most parents are awesome. You're not going to have a whole lot of negative things, but just because most people are good in the world doesn't mean you shouldn't cover yourself legally in all situations. So, advice, again, open the lines of communication early. If a parent's heard from you and they feel like they know you, they're likely to want to work with you on a situation with their kid rather than have this big blow up confrontation. If they've never heard from you and their kid trash talks you every day, then there's no reasonable parent in the world that is going to automatically take your side without like firm evidence to do so. If a student gets up, and I would challenge yourself to make a positive call, 3 to 5 calls a week. I'm talking like short 2 minute, 3 minute conversations. Hey, I just wanted to call and let you know that Susie did this good thing or that good thing. That make them real. Don't make them fake. But call and just say something nice about kids 3 to 5 times a week. Think about it. If you have 30 students, you could reach out to all of your students' parents in less than a month, and they would hear from you and hear from you and hear from you, and they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt if you have some sort of conflict. If a student gets upset about something in your class that day, you need to call home and say, listen, Johnny was really upset about something in class today. He didn't want to talk about it, but I just wanted to give you a heads up, because hopefully you do care about your students, or you really shouldn't be teaching, but you should care about your students enough to want them to get checked on by their parents when they get home. If something major happens in class, you need to let parents know. And that could be anything from like there was a fight in your class that day, or there was something else. You need to call home and say, hey, this happened and your student wasn't involved, but you might want to just talk to them about it. If there's something major that happens at school, parents always want a heads up about what's going on in their kids' lives. The other part is if you're teaching older students, you need to be judicious about whether your communication to the parent is in the best interest of the student. You don't want to encourage helicopter parents. And those are the parents that, like, and it's always a mom of a boy almost. But, mom of a boy, 17-year-old boy, will email you or call you and ask them about their makeup work. Well, that 17-year-old boy ought to be asking about his makeup work, not his parent. And you need to kind of gently set those boundaries with parents and say, look, Joe's not going to really grow as a person if you're having to do this kind of work for him. He needs to ask me, and kind of force their hand into making Joe ask for it rather than them. Should you include parents on emails or things to students and everybody about what work they're missing? Absolutely. They need to know. As long as that kid's a minor, they have a right to know. So you just need to be judicious about it. I would include them on your overall communication, but I wouldn't call them about every small incident. If you have a high school student who you absolutely can't do anything with, then you need to enlist the parents to help them. But if everything goes pretty smoothly with the kid for the most of the time, you don't need to contact their parents about small things. For the same reason I said in a previous video, then you have usurped your own authority and given it to their parent instead of you. So just be judicious about that. And please don't be fake with the compliment sandwich where you say something positive and then you get to the actual reason you called and say something negative and then you say something positive again. You can do that if it is authentic. You can say, listen, Susie is one of my favorite students. She's so energetic, but man, today we had a bad day. She was just a little bit too much. She got into it with this other kid, and I had to correct her. I think things are going to be great, though, because she's such a resilient kid. She'll bounce back from this. That is authentic. But when it's the first of the year and you don't even know this kid and they do something bad and you want to set the tone early by calling home and letting parents know about it. If you don't know anything about the kid, then you don't really have anything positive to say. You can say, look, I don't know your son very well at all. It's the first week of school and I want to have a great relationship with all of my students and their parents, and so that's why I'm calling you. So don't feel forced into the compliment sandwich when it is not authentic. I would hope you would get to know all of your students to where you always have positive things to say about them. But if it's the first of the year, don't be fake about it because then it makes it seem like you're a liar. That's all we have for today. Hope you enjoyed the video.